So, welcome to the Heart of Agile Meetup. One of the reasons I'm excited about this particular meetup is this is our first one under the umbrella of the Agile Denver Meetup Group. We have been working with them kind of behind the scenes to get added to that group. And so now we are one of their special interest groups there. So hopefully that will give us a little bit extra visibility and maybe even help us grow the size of the group and everything. So we're super excited about that. Love all of the meetup groups. I've been involved in several of the other meetup groups that are part of that umbrella. So excited to be doing that. And that means that we will be recording these and they will be posted on the Agile Denver YouTube channel as well. So this month's topic is QA in the Agile space. And Alex just posted a Google Doc in the chat. That is something that we try to do every time. It's going to have some agendas in there, the agenda in there, some announcements, taking notes, and having some discussion in there. And there will also be a place at the bottom of that that we will get put in there where if you are looking for a job or if you have a job that you are hiring for, people can put their names on there, and you can let us know whether you want that published like beyond just this group. And if so, we can put that out there in case anyone is hiring. So getting all of that out of the way, and then we can jump into the topic. Since there is a small little intimate group of us today, I don't think we'll be doing breakout rooms. But would just like to have open discussion. We sometimes will have a presentation and then have discussion. Sometimes we just do open discussion for the entire session. And this time I was thinking it would be interesting just to have discussion, and starting with, would love to do kind of a little poll of what different ways of doing quality assurance have you seen teams use and organizations use? So an example that most of us have seen would be manual QA. So having someone who is a QA expert either embedded on a team or in a separate team doing the quality testing and doing that all manually. So that would be one example. What else have you all seen?
Automation.
Quality automation, yes. That's definitely the way the industry seems to be going. Curious, because I have seen, like I mentioned with manual QA, I've seen it where it's embedded in a team or in a separate team where there's, I've seen where there are like 3 development teams that don't have QA, and once they finish developing, they throw it over to the QA team to test it while they move on to something else. I'm not saying I endorse any of these practices per se. I'm just saying I've seen them. But curious how you've seen the automation implemented.
Okay, I didn't see it implemented. I just have heard, like my husband is a software architect, so
okay, cool.
Hear a lot about that.
Is there anyone else who has worked with automated testing that has an experience they could share with how they saw it implemented?
I mean, a lot of times the unit testing gets done as part of the new implementation, the new work being done, and then that kind of feeds into becoming regression tests for system testing. Like in next further iterations, it becomes part of the automated test suite. So,
yep. Definitely have seen that.
We do the same thing on the programs I work with, similar to what Kat just mentioned, where every commit gets, everything that's been peer reviewed. So you get a peer reviewed commit that becomes a pull request. You merge that into the baseline. Mm-hmm. It then goes through automated unit testing, which you can do locally ahead of time to make sure it passes. So it's all Jenkins automation. If that passes, it goes to the next step, which is integration testing or functional testing, whatever you call it, which can be a long process. So one program I used that I was on had a very, very extensive functional testing. It was all automated, but it took a couple of hours. So what we did was we had a smaller set of that, which would be run with every commit, but then every night we would run this longer, full automated functional testing so we could get the whole day's worth of commits under that full thread of the system, because it was a complex system. So it was a different automation depending on which stage it was in, and then it would make it to the integration test environment where it would do even more testing, manual.
Nice. I was just adding a couple notes in the Google Doc. Cool. Any other types of testing that you all have seen, or roles around testing?
David's seen testing where there's a sort of an informal test between the QA and the dev taking place before the code or the package is migrated into a formal QA environment. So they get together and essentially walk through the task or the story, depending on what they're doing, and that gives us sort of a smoke or a sanity type check to be comfortable that there's not anything obvious not working and it can move into the next environment, which obviously even with automation and automatic deployments does have a bit of an overhead. Yeah.
Very nice. Has anybody seen where teams that have embedded QA members have them pair with the developer throughout the development process?
Yep. That's how we work. Yep.
Okay.
Kind of abbreviated 3 amigos kind of a version. Yep.
Now, are y'all doing that as test-driven development where the QA is helping them write tests before they start coding, or is it writing kind of alongside?
We just started experimenting with that, David, writing test case designs along with the acceptance criteria, and essentially the developers can see both the test cases of what needs to pass and the acceptance criteria. So it gives them more information when they commence a story. Yeah.
Okay. Zoe, I see your question of the 3 amigos approach. Peter, since you mentioned that, do you want to expound on that?
Yeah, sometimes it's the multiple amigos because you drag in architects and others, but essentially it's the classic, the BA, the developer, the tester, they all get together before you commence a story and all make sure they've all got the same expectations, we're on the same page, bring in their different skill sets. So you don't start and go off on 3 different angles with the BA saying, I wrote this, the developer coded this, and the tester tests something else. It's just making sure you're aligned before you start something.
Cool. Great question. Yeah, we tend to throw out terminology sometimes that others may not understand. So please feel free to ask questions if any of us use terminologies that you are not familiar with.
I'm curious, Peter, if you have seen resistance in the team members to that kind of working so closely together, or has that gone pretty well?
Not in the current environment. I mean, I have seen it in the past in a previous role where some of the testers said, just write the code and I'll test it. I'll just look at the requirements and I'll just write tests off that and I'll test it. And that took a little bit of convincing to have them, shall we say, more engaged at the start of the cycle. Yeah. Most see the logic to it, most understand, oh, actually, yes, I'm not going to spend 2 days writing test cases and then find out I've got half of them wrong. Yeah. Or you can write the test cases and write the code at the same time and test and go.
I wondered too if the developers liked having people involved with stuff so early, they kind of want to do their own thing sometimes. And I was just curious how that.
Most I have met a couple who are like, no, just I'll throw it at QA later, but not many. Most of them appreciate the quality focus and what you're trying to achieve.
Nice.
And I've seen companies actually hire based off of the mindset that the developer has in terms of being willing to do that test-driven type development, collaborating with the testers, in some of that work. So that's becoming more and more common, I think. And so I think earlier in my career of doing Agile stuff, I saw more resistance to it. But more recently, in the last 3 to 4 years, I've seen developers be a lot more open to it as it's become more commonplace.
Yeah, it's more about quality assurance today. We don't do what we call test metrics. We look at the whole cycle of what's the unit tests, your peer review, your informal testing, and that's what we report on when we do our sprint reports, and try to emphasize to our audience that it is a cycle of work with everyone starting at the beginning and finishing at the end.
Yeah. So I want to throw out one more option, which the company I'm working for, Xero, is the first place where I've seen this specific role. And it's a little bit different. It's the quality coach role. Have any of the rest of you seen that role? Yeah. So Jenny just started working at Xero as well. This is her 3rd week with us. So one, super excited to have her with us. But 2, she's absolutely seen this role because the teams she's working with do utilize it. And for us, it became a necessity because we had 2 QA people working with 3 teams. And then one of them became a PO, leaving us with 1 quality, basically a manual tester for 3 teams. And that just wasn't going to work. And we had already been talking about trying to shift the responsibility for testing and quality to the engineers, and trying to figure out what that would look like. So we created the quality coach role. And basically, he works as a coach very similar as to I do from the Agile side, but he's coming from the quality side. And so he helps advise them in how the automated framework should be set up, what kind of tests they should be writing at what level, like what should be unit tests, what should be integration tests, what should be regression tests, those in the regression tests, all those different types of testing aspects. And honestly, he's taken it even further than I expected, and I'm loving what he's doing because he's made my job a lot easier, to where a lot of times he's kind of calling them on the quality of their process as well. They'll want to just like pick up some work and start running with it without having actually refined the story or made sure that there's that shared understanding. And he calls them on those kind of things too. So it's allowed him to really coach the teams alongside with the Agile group to be able to help the teams with their process. And then he also is responsible for creating dashboards and helping the teams create dashboards for their information radiators, getting metrics out to the stakeholders so that they can see how the team is performing, and so that the team themselves can see how they're performing and be able to iterate on that and improve. Curious what you all think of that approach, or if it would be something that would work in the environments you all are in.
Yeah, I've seen a similar thing with a coding coach, David, in a past organization I worked, as you pretty much alluded to, worked with the developers, ensuring consistency of standards and CI/CD, that kind of thing. And he worked across multiple squads, and a lot of it was around consistency and the best practice and things like that. And he was phenomenally good. You saw the impact very quickly.
Nice.
Similar to Peter, I've seen a software lead or software architect have a similar type of role. It's not exactly focused on quality. They do a little bit more. Some of it's just on here's the right way to structure the code. If you're going to refactor it, here's what you do. So it's more dev centric, but it does certainly come with, and here's how you test it, and some other things that you were just mentioning. So I've seen that before, and spanning multiple teams with software architects, for instance. But I like the idea of having an explicit quality coach. That's a really good idea.
Zoe, I think you were getting ready to talk.
I was just snooping on your LinkedIn, and I see you been an Agile coach for a year and a half, and I was just wondering, what's like, is there a big frustration you have in that role? Like, since you're so niche and into that and specialized, there's got to be something.
Lots.
Yeah, there's always frustrations because people are people. Wow. Let me think how to answer that. So I was a Scrum Master for quite a while before becoming a coach. And I think the frustration, maybe the biggest frustration would be that I expected as I moved into the coaching role that I'm working more with managers and like more the leaders in the organization rather than directly with the teams. So there's a little bit of missing the effect I can have on the teams themselves, but I kind of expected the managers and especially the upper manager leaders to, how do I say this in a work appropriate way, to have their stuff together a little bit better, and to be better at collaborating and actually like thinking about how the decisions they're making at their level affect the people below them and how it can have that impact. And what I have learned is people are people, and it doesn't matter what level of the organization you are. I find a lot of the similar mindsets and dysfunctions as we're at the team level. My hope in that is that working with these leaders, that hopefully if we can address some of those issues at that higher level, then it will make it easier on the teams themselves to do their work, and have less of those issues. So I would say that's the biggest thing in the time that I've been doing this.
That was very diplomatic. Thank you for explaining that.
Thanks. But yeah, the quality is something that I don't think I've ever seen two companies that approach it exactly the same way. And I like to try to expand it beyond just what the teams are doing, like the code that they're writing. A lot of times we think about quality as just, oh, we need to write tests that pass for our software to show that it works. But if you're building the wrong thing, that's also an issue. So how do we incorporate quality into figuring out the product backlog? How do we incorporate quality into even just prioritizing what the business value is of different features to give them to teams? I would be curious what experience any of you might have or thoughts any of you might have in terms of how to shift quality beyond just the teams, but to the broader organization.
This isn't exactly what you're asking, but I feel like it is related. And it was one of the biggest concerns I had coming into the Agile environment. I mean, waterfall has its drawbacks, of course, but it's almost like a lot of, not large companies, but a lot of small companies, people building apps and that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, let's stick this on, and let's stick this on, let's stick this on. And it ends up being like a conglomeration of code with not a lot of architecture, which can, maybe it runs through the tests, but is it functioning well? If it's thought of kind of piecemeal and it's like, oh, well, this is hot now, let's stick this in there. There's not a lot of thought, and maybe the architecture isn't done well, and it can affect quality in a huge way.
Absolutely. And something else that what you were describing made me think of is gold plating of products, where you just keep adding features that maybe aren't super valuable to the end user, but that the team thinks is really cool. And and it ends up affecting the way the customer can use the product because they're having to like figure out what's actually valuable to them and what's not.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think in both of those cases, whether it's that they were just built and then just stuck together to where the architecture isn't super solid, or whether it's that they just keep adding things to it that may not be necessary. That whole idea of, oh man, I just lost the saying. Maximize the amount of work not done. So think about like, what is the minimum we can build that's going to give value to the customer? And then we can move on to the next most valuable thing instead of just continuing to build something to death when it's not really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's easy to go after sometimes those small, like, oh, this is like a bells and whistles kind of thing. And you keep putting off something that's really, really going to make a big difference for the product for various reasons. But yeah.
Yeah. So how do we avoid that? How do we shift quality, shift it left in the organization to where it's not about like doing quality at the code level, but even that quality in the discovery and in the prioritization aspect?
It's a hard question.
Go ahead.
I was going to mention one thing, which is that when you shift it all the way left to like what the ideas are and what the product is you're going to work on or the feature you're going to work on, that can be really hard because it's always easy in hindsight to say which features were successful, but you don't ever, very rarely know ahead of time what's going to be successful. You just kind of work and you hope that it's going to be used by the end user, but you don't know which features are actually going to be important. But one thing you can do if you go one step right or a couple steps right, when you're trying to figure out which specific features within the product would be useful, is to get your end user involved, get not just your stakeholders for who's paying for the product and who's actually the product owner or whatever that role is for product manager within your organization, but also the end users, the customer, and get their feedback on it and to try to get them to relatively value the different features that you have lined up. And then you can do things like WSJIF, the weighted shortest job first, to say, okay, they value this thing more than the next, but the next thing is significantly less effort. So I'm going to work on that first because it'll deliver the most value soonest, right? So that's the kind of calculation that works decently within my industry because I have a contact with my end user. I don't have a ton of end users. I have a government customer. So that becomes a little bit easy. But if you're working on a mass market type of product, then I guess you could do kind of market research on end users to get that kind of feel. But something like that, getting your end users to help with that prioritization might be a way to shift it left.
All right, so I'm going to go on and ask this. I know the answer, but just in case there's anyone on here who doesn't, can you explain WSJIF? I know it's a SAFe term, or it comes from the SAFe framework more. That's the only place I've seen it actually, but Alex, would you mind kind of just expounding on that a little bit so that anyone who's not familiar can?
Sure, I'll try. And I have my kids trying to break into the room, so if you hear background noise, that's what that is. So it's a calculation and it stands for weighted shortest job first. So the idea is you're trying to work on the shortest job that has the most value. And the way you do it is you get independent measures of both the effort and the value of what you're working. And there's other things that go into it. For instance, the relative time importance. So there's a time value to things as well. But it kind of boils down to what's your relative value of different features divided by the effort. And you can do it in terms of like story points or stories, or even just get your developers or architects to say, okay, this is a large and this is a small, whatever metric you want to use to say this is effort. And you take that value and then you can scale it by it's important now and it's less, or it's really important in 2 months, and kind of try to quantify that divide that by your effort, and whatever the maximum number or maximum value that comes out of that is your priority. So it's a way to prioritize items on your backlog at a high level. So like a feature level, epic level type of thing.
Nice, thank you. I'm curious because I know you were talking about including the customer and figuring out value. How many of you have seen a company do a good job of that in trying to prioritize and especially like with like Safe and with WizGIF, like have you seen them actually bring customers in to be a part of that calculation and figuring out that value?
Probably not into the actual calculation, David, to be brought in and to express what they see as value and what they feel is what they need, but probably not to get into any more detail than that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I think there's a dichotomy there where it feels like it's too intrusive on the customer to include them super early and all of that, but I think everybody knows that it would be also super valuable to include them early and get that feedback. And so it's curious to me why we don't do that more. Why don't we find some trusted customers that we can bring in and do that? I have seen at Xero we're doing a better job, or getting better at actually doing some customer research and using either customer interviews or building data collection tools into the software to be able to discover how people are using the software to help us inform those decisions. But what else have y'all seen to try to pull that forward in the absence of a customer?
I've seen software being used, David, where you can see which areas of the application are getting more heavily used and what kind of reporting or what kind of information they're doing, or inversely where they're getting stuck and taking the longest to perform a certain task. And that can give you a set of metrics to work with or focus on.
I like what you actually both of you ended up saying about the delayed data collection part of that to determine what the customer is using, because people are notoriously not aware of what they like and what they really want. They think they want this, and then you give them that, and they don't want that. They don't use it. So it's interesting to me, like, to think about development from the standpoint of what are some things that I could put in place that would actually give me information that I could use for some other purpose, to kind of design around that for early products. I don't know what that would be exactly, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. But I've seen companies that like rely almost solely on the data that they're getting from their software and not doing any customer interviews. And that makes me super uncomfortable, because what if you've built your software in a way that makes it difficult for them to find features or use features, and that's what's causing the data that you're collecting back? So I think it's super important to involve at least some customer interviews in the process and not solely rely on data. I'm seeing some nods, so I'm feeling like that's striking home on in some ways there.
And to elaborate on what I was saying earlier, my customer is different from most since I work in government defense. So literally, I just call up a major in the Space Force and have him sit down in the room with me and say, "What's your value of each of these different features?" But even that is something that's rarely done in my industry, even though your customer can be pinpointed to like a single individual who's making the decision on whether your project gets funded or not or extended. Most people don't really listen to that person. They just present, "Oh, here's our stuff we worked on, here's the demo." And then maybe that's your feedback is like, "Oh, they like it or they don't like it, but you don't get that insight into what you're planning to do next. You leave them out of that. That's commonly done in my industry, but I've tried to shift that so that I do get the customer involved early. And it's hard for them to do that, because then they're like, here's your list of requirements. Why do I have to prioritize more? And then like, well, no, because I need to know what to work on first. And then, there's a lot to it. So there's a way to explain it, but it is uncomfortable on the customer side as well. It takes coaching of the customer.
Absolutely.
And there's one other thing I saw that somebody put in the doc, the WSGIF calculation. What's on the numerator there is the cost of delay. So you can go on the website, and this is one area where I teach safe stuff, but I sometimes deviate on this point, where I like to just put value up there, like value times time criticality. Cost of delay is technically like user value plus time criticality plus like some risk opportunity assessment and maybe other factors, but it just gets confusing in my point of view when I'm trying to teach that. So I just like, it's just value, your relative value, and you can weight the value by the time criticality of it or whatever else goes into it. Like, how important is this one thing to you? And then you divide it by the duration or the effort, and that's how you get your WSGIF. It's a great exercise to try. So if you guys haven't tried that, do it the next time you guys are doing a PI planning or whatever you're doing to figure out what features to work next. I really like it.
Yeah, and honestly, I worked in Safe for 2 years before moving to Zero. It's the only time I've used Safe, but the WSGIF is one of the tools from Safe that I would probably be willing to use in the future and pull in. I'm all about deconstructing the frameworks and using the tools and pieces of them and cobbling together my own thing that works for the teams I'm working with. Because I've never found a framework that works for me out of the box. So that's kind of the way I approach it. And yeah, WSGIF, I always found that to be a fascinating aspect of Safe and something that could really help inform some of those decisions that in ways that sometimes we don't think about them. But something else you mentioned, Alex, made me think about sprint reviews. So you were mentioning like demonstrating like what you did in the sprint and getting feedback from the customer. How many of you have seen companies effectively use sprint reviews to inform the quality of what they're building?
50-50.
I guess I hadn't thought of. So when you're talking about sprint reviews, you're talking more about where the customer demo's coming in rather than say the retrospective. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So where you're showing stakeholders, whether it's internal, external, or a mix of the two, showing them this is what we've built, this is kind of where we're heading, that kind of thing, and the intent is to get their feedback to help inform what you're going to build next in the next iteration.
I think it was on a contract where that was happening, but it was the product owner that was leading that charge, and I got the results.
But when you got the results, was it informing you that yes, we're going in the right direction, or like was the feedback you were getting, like did it help inform you like what needs to be built next and even changing what might have been planned originally?
I assume that the product owner got that, yeah, because when it was not unusual to see a change of instructions for the next sprint.
Cool. That's the way it should work. So that's good.
I have seen absolutely shocking.
I have seen that very rarely. And honestly, at Zero, that's something that I think we could do better on. We do pretty good, I think, at getting internal stakeholder feedback, but external stakeholder feedback seems to rarely happen.
Do you have a big enough customer base to have a user group yet?
We should, yes.
Okay.
And that's something I'm not even 100% sure if we have. So I'm going to actually make a note to look into that.
Okay, because I've worked on other accounting systems, and that's one of the resources for feedback. And my first product owner job was product designer, I guess. I know that the product manager he had a set of particular users that he just simply kept in touch with.
Okay, very cool.
I'm going to hide now.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I have seen at companies where they would bring in users to do like specific user testing of a feature to see if it's going to do what they thought it would, or like having built a prototype and then going over that. And I believe we do a good job of that, but I'm always looking for tips and tricks to move quality earlier in the process.
And another one I've seen, sorry,
Go ahead, Peter.
The company I worked with who did SAFe, and they had the fifth sprint as the innovation sprint, and they would mine their way through Facebook and look for bits of feedback or little gems to say, oh, we'd like this, or this would make life more useful. And developers would grab one or two of those, in an IP sprint and actually say, hey, yeah, I'll reach out to the customer and we'll build something and demo it, and use that period of time to just do that kind of work and get a couple of runs on the board, as they say.
I like that. Alex, you were getting ready to say something.
All right. At the sprint review, what you were saying about getting the customers involved and changing direction based off of that, I totally agree. That's how it's intended. And I also rarely see it that way. But in the absence of that, I often see anti-patterns where the internal stakeholders will focus on, okay, we're 2 sprints into the PI, or this is whatever it is, whatever deadline is that we're trying to approach for this overall product. Are we on track? And you focus on schedule, as opposed to, should we be doing this? And is this actually looking the way it should? The focus tends to be on schedule. Or you beat up the Scrum team for your velocity dipped since the last sprint. What happened? And that can happen in sprint reviews, which I hate to see that, but it happens. I've seen it many times. So I think as an Agile coach, that's definitely one of my priorities. If you're using sprint reviews for either beating up the dev team or just getting that internal stakeholder feedback, where you're just checking schedule and stuff like that, then I would get rid of them until you can have that external feedback, because I can come up with those charts myself. I can look at the burn downs and the burn ups, and I can report that. I can take the team out of that. I don't want, I view my job very much as an umbrella for the team. I'd rather upper people poop on me, and I can protect the team from that, because it's just it's so demoralizing for dev teams to be part of a ineffective sprint review.
I think it's even harder, David, if your internal stakeholders are holding the money. He who has the gold makes the rules, or she or them. And that's another thing where I've seen where customers are saying one thing, but your internal budget holders are saying, no, we've got approval in this business case to build that, so that's what we're going to build. And sometimes it doesn't end well.
Yeah, that's very fair. And to what you were saying, Alex, I've seen that too, where it becomes a dive into the metrics rather than actual feedback on the value of what's been delivered. And I see that as part of my job as a coach, and I know you do this as well as trying to protect them, is coaching the stakeholders on what that review is for and how to give that feedback in the appropriate way and that kind of thing, so that it doesn't end up, because especially if you've got customers in your sprint review, you don't want to be chastising the team for their velocity dropping by a point or whatever in the front of a customer. That's never ends well. So making sure that we're having the right conversations in the right place, I think, can be super important for that too. And that's something that really you got to have those kind of guidelines set up ahead of time, instead of trying to address them on the fly. All right. So what other aspects of quality in an organization can we dive into?
Another one I've done, David, is around the technical debt. Is often people will make an assumption that technical debt is bugs or bad coding, whereas tech debt starts right back from a poorly captured or written story all the way through to a bit of a botched deployment, and trying to tell that story or how the components of that cycle, right from the start, from that inception process, from those early conversations, sometimes around a water cooler, can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, technical debt is the
It's not just bugs and bad coding.
no, absolutely, it's not just that. But I do think it does get a lot of that bad rap. And honestly, I feel like tech debt can almost be designed where you are making intentional choices on how you're designing your software to where you know that at some certain point you're going to have to go back and change the way something was built. But that's okay as long as you're aware of that as you're building the
As
first
long
time.
as it's intentional and you recognize that and you recognize the need to go back, and the short-term value over the, I suppose you could almost call it a temporary waste in some respects, but it's being conscious of it, and it's visible.
Right. An example I can give is one of our teams working on a new feature and really need to be able to get it out in front of some customers to get feedback. But the piece of work was bigger than the time they had to deliver it to get it in front of the customers. So what they ended up doing was mocking up the database and building the front end to use that mocked up database. And then they released that to just a specific set of customers behind a feature flag to allow them to be able to control that group. And then we're able to get feedback on the way it was working, even though it was just mock data and not really connected to the live data that was out there. And then now they're taking the learnings from that to then go back and make adjustments and then build out the database. So that was designed technical debt, where they knew that they were basically throwing away all of that mock code that they wrote for the data, but it allowed them to get some learnings faster so that they make sure that they're building the right thing.
I have a related question, which is about technical debt. How do your teams handle it? Like, you have technical debt. Sometimes, as David, you're saying, you know about it. You intentionally include it. Oftentimes, technical debt, you're trading expedience for extensibility. Like, I know that it's not going to be a good scalable long-term solution, but I need to get it done. That's technical debt, right? And there's other ways that technical debt gets introduced. But then how do you go back and fix it? How do you go back and change it? There's tons of different ways to handle it. I'm curious what your teams do.
So the teams that I'm currently working with, the technical debt that's like the intentional technical debt, like what I just talked about, they basically had stories in the backlog to fix this, to build out the database and to make the changes, like as they learned from the release, like building new stories to cover those changes they need to make, and then also have the stories for actually building out the database and making any schema changes they need to make. So it's planned into the regular backlog for the teams I'm working with currently. I have seen companies where it was done where the product owner owned the backlog for new features, new work, and any technical debt, whether it was intentional or unintentional technical debt, belonged to the engineering team. And they were given, I think it was I've seen it done in two different companies, and one of them, it was 20% of the sprint capacity, and the other one was 30% of the sprint capacity, that the engineering team got to actually choose what technical debt they wanted to work on for that sprint, for that 30% of their capacity, and the other 70% went to the product owner to prioritize for new feature work. So that's another way I've seen it done, with mixed results. I've seen it work really well in some cases, and in other cases I've seen where they couldn't really make much of a dent in the technical debt with just 30% of the team's capacity. And so like some things that they were trying to really get changed that they planned to change just took way longer than it needed to. And they ended up having to do some bartering with the PO to get a little bit more time for a couple of sprints so they could actually make significant progress. So
yeah, that's the best I've seen, though, when an organization where the technical debt was a specific items as technical debt in the backlog, and the product owner was very open to bringing them into sprints as, you know, as prioritized, and would maybe take 1 or 2 items per sprint or something like that. Or in the same organization, occasionally some of it got tackled in the IP sprint. That's the sprint goal would be go fix something that irritates you. So go and pick the technical debt that as a developer you particularly don't like and go and fix that for 2 weeks. So yeah, and those, yeah, it's prevention's better than the cure. And when you have to apply the cure, just be prepared to be patient. Yeah.
I love that sprint goal. And, go pick something that irritates you.
I love it. It was just, they got very enthusiastic. It was the IP sprint. The product owner's like, guys, it's your sprint. You want to do training, you want to do technical debt, you want to learn a new code base, go do it. And they came up with this, actually that thing there, those libraries, and that just annoys me. Let's fix it. So yeah, they were very enthusiastic during that sprint.
that's awesome. And I would say, in the light of Heart of Agile with the collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve, the biggest aspect, regardless of how you deal with technical debt, I think the biggest part of it is that collaboration. Having the engineering team and the product owner having that discussion about why it's important, what's important, and basically prioritizing together. Whenever I've seen a product owner adamantly say, I'm in charge of the product backlog and I'm not prioritizing any of that technical debt till we finish new features, it never ends well. And if a development team isn't willing to speak up about technical debt and why it's important, what I tend to see them do is trying to fix it on the sly and not like tell people that they're working on it. And that never, ever, ever ends well.
I've seen that also attempted, David, and 2 years after the technical debt was fixed, they were still arguing about which project should have paid for it. So yeah, they were happy it was fixed, but yeah, it just wouldn't go away. It was it was we got the zombie story. The zombie project just wouldn't die no matter what you tried to do.
And go ahead.
I was going to do a slight segue, so you go, David.
I was just going to say that I think the biggest thing for me, just as we've talked through all of this with quality, and as I've been thinking about this a lot just with my regular job over the last several weeks, I feel like the biggest part of it is that collaboration. That's what quality is all about, is not trying to work in a silo where you're coding or planning a project or developing features or whatever you're doing, that you're not doing it in a silo without getting other people's input, without checking yourself against other things, but collaborating with others and making sure that you're getting that buy-in and double checking yourself. Because I can't say how many times I've thought, man, I'm 100% sure this is the right way to approach something. And then once I start collaborating with someone else, I realize that would have gone horribly wrong and I need to completely change the way I was approaching this. So that would be kind of my tie-in to the Heart of Agile thing here, is that collaboration, I think, is the the key element across any approach to quality assurance.
That's an interesting tie-in, David, and it's related to what I was going to say, because I don't think we explained at the start of this what Heart of Agile is. So I was going to do a quick segue into that for those that are new and those that need a reminder or refresher. I just put the image at the top of the Google Doc. That's the Heart of Agile logo. It has 4 quadrants, and as David said, he's a big fan of stripping away frameworks and getting down to what's essential and finding bits and pieces that work for whatever situation you're in. And that's kind of what the Heart of Agile is. Alistair Coburn, one of the original signatories from the Agile Manifesto now 20 years ago, came up with this movement, Heart of Agile. It's not a framework, it's kind of a movement. I don't know, 5-ish years ago, 6, something like that.
Actually, it was 2014, so 7 years ago now.
7 years ago now, okay. So he created this and just made it really simple. About 4 different quadrants: collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve. And David, it's interesting you mentioned collaborate. Is when we talk about quality, the key tie-in is collaborate, not necessarily improve, which you might think of as quality. But I kind of agree that you can't. It's hard to improve in terms of quality without collaboration, and so collaboration is essential. And if you have collaboration, you're kind of building in quality. So along those lines, that's a quick primer into Heart of Agile. If you want more information on it, under the announcements section of the Google Doc, there is a Heart of Agile Academy. If you want to take a course there, they don't do like a lot of like official certifications. There are a couple, but they're really just courses to discuss and learn a bit with like-minded people. So you can follow that, and if you're interested in that. And David and I are passionate about this. We co-host this meetup, so you can always bounce ideas off of us as well. But I wanted to make sure everyone had at least some tie into, oh, here is what Heart of Agile is. Anything to add, David?
The only thing I want to add to that is I did see where you added into the document the being part of the official Agile Denver SIG. So I just added the YouTube channel in there as well. So if you want to check out the YouTube channel and subscribe to that, you should be able to reach that as well. We've got the list of all of the other special interest groups in there as well. So would be super happy to have y'all check all of those out as well. You pretty much could probably go to maybe 2 meetups a week just related to Agile Denver if you were interested. I know I'm not able to get to as many as I would like to, but yeah, we are super excited about that and happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's a great group. They have a Mile High Agile conference every year that's been canceled recently because of global stuff. But that's a great thing to look forward to and be a part of, and that's on the website as well. And there's a Slack channel that has a ton of people. So they do job postings there. You can introduce yourself there. You can talk about different parts of Agile there. I can send anybody an invite if you give me your email address that you'd like to hook up to that Slack channel. So if you want that, please put your email address either in the doc or in the chat here, and I'll send you an invitation.
Cool. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. It's scheduled to go to 6:15, but sometimes we finish early if the conversation kind of wraps up. Feels like we're at sort of a natural wrap up spot here. Does anyone have any final thoughts on quality or anything else you just want to throw out in the last couple of minutes?
I was just thinking it's lunchtime, so I'm getting hungry. Sorry, David.
No worries.
Don't give me that big a door.
Well, again, thank you all for coming. Super happy to see all of you here, especially the new folks. Welcome, and hope you will be back. And we do historically, we've met on the first Tuesday of every month. Over the last several months, it's ended up getting pushed to the second Tuesday. we're going to try to start with next month to get back to the first Tuesday of every month that we'll be meeting.
Okay.
We'll see how we
Nice.
do. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and hope you all have a great evening.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.